So this is extremely interesting because the last World Energy Congresses that I've had a chance to participate in, both in Istanbul and prior to that in South Korea, I didn't get the sense of a new vision for energy, for prosperity, and the dialogue that's taking place between the hydrocarbon sector and the renewable sector. And we even see it if you say follow the money, whether it's from Wall Street or the city of London or Shanghai or Tokyo, the amount of money that's going into renewables and transition fuels like gas. But it doesn't, as we see in Abu Dhabi, which has very robust proven oil reserves, it doesn't, we're not seeing capital going into the oil and gas sector. But I'd like to start with Chairman Al Marar, as the chairman of the Abu Dhabi Department of Energy, because the vision that has come from the UAE on the national level has put forward some very aggressive targets for renewable energy by 2050. How do you structure that into the vision for Abu Dhabi as an emirate to lay out that blueprint in a place that has plentiful oil and gas to change your energy mix?
First of all, thank you, John. I think they are an easy target. Those targets are an easy targets because we've demonstrated those on a couple of the projects that I'll be talking about them. But in fact, we're glad today to have this type of forum. And the Energy Congress is actually being held here. This is where the true value that are creating best for energy utilization. Now, Abu Dhabi throughout the history of the energy have reached a remarkable success when it comes to the transitions. And without the clear leadership vision, we would have never reached there. And the second important issues, and I think some of the speakers have touched on, which is the human capital development. We need to focus on the future of the human capital, those people who are actually going to take us from this situation to a much, much better and a greater situation. If you put this in an overall context, at the federal level within UAE, we have targets on the clean energy and renewables, where each emirate is actually contributing to that. Abu Dhabi is underway of launching and actually operating some of renewable projects, including the nuclears as well. We should not repeat what has been there and stated, but we are underway, and I don't call them difficult targets. Actually, they are achievable targets.
Achievable targets going forward. And the commitment to do so is in line with the Paris Agreement, is what we were suggesting, Chairman?
Exactly. Exactly. We are working on reduction of 70% of the CO2 emission that comes from the power generation. We're also focusing on changing customers' behavior of increasing the efficiency of energy as well as a use of it. So that is in line with the Paris Agreement, and we are committed to that.
Okay, very good. Fatih Birol, I'm going to see if we can bring this first graphic up. This monitor is not on, so we may have to turn to take a look, but I have the data behind it. I wanted to follow the money, the amount of money, the power sector, and that going in oil and gas between 2014 and 2018. It's quite amazing because if you go back to 2014, we saw about $1 trillion a year going into the oil and gas sector itself. And then for the last 3 years, and it's up here, we need, I don't know if you can see it onto the screen to the right and to the left, but our audience can see it. But in the last 3 or 4 years, we're looking at about $700 billion going into oil and gas, and about $700 billion going into the power sector itself. What is that telling us now about the new visions of energy, the balance of the portfolio, how the IEA sees the willingness to broaden their investments in and outside of hydrocarbons at the same time?
So thank you very much, John, and many thanks to the World Energy Council, and especially my colleague Christoph Frey, who helped to organize this great event in this beautiful city of Abu Dhabi. Now, two things, one about the investments, and the second about this very region of Middle East. About investments, what we do at the IEA, each year we measure how much investment in the energy sector is made by any single country around the world. What is the budget of the energy sector? Oil, gas, electricity, efficiency, coal, all of them. We make it, John, years and years. It was always oil and gas sector had the biggest share in the total energy investments. But in the last 2 years, we see that the power sector is #1. This is for many reasons, in addition to the fact that more and more we see renewables in the power sector investment, which are more capital intensive, but also a trend, which is electrification of the world, electrification of our societies. We will need oil and gas many years to come, but we will see electrification, digitalization will be more of a part of the world, and more investments will go there. This is the first point I wanted to make. Second, about this very region. We heard Prince Abdulaziz, the new Minister of Saudi Arabia, talking about the oil markets. Since we are here, John, in Middle East, I want to make a modest warning. More than at any point in history, this region needs to diversify its economy. It has been discussed a lot in the past as well, many decades. But why it is very urgent now? Why it's imperative? 3 dimensions. One, in this region, 80% of the fiscal revenues come from oil. This is #1. #2, a giant new producer is coming or has come to the oil markets, United States, with huge implications. It means suddenly you see another competitor there. And third, oil demand will increase, but increase weaker than what we have seen in the past because of the technological developments from electric cars to improving energy efficiency of the jets, petrochemical sector, and so on. So putting these two together, on one hand, a lot of supply coming from United States. Second, demand becoming weaker. It is very important to see that the amounts of oil that will be exported from this region may well be lower than what was hoped before, and the level of price may not be at a level than it was hoped before. Therefore, this could have serious implication on the revenues, therefore the economies, therefore the social life of these countries. Therefore, my humble suggestion is, it is now time, very high time, to broaden the base of the economies, and I think Emirates is a good example here. The Saudi Vision 2030, if implemented, a good plan, and I think all the countries should look at it before it is too late.
Okay. Let me follow up quickly, and then I'll bring in Patrick Pouyanne. There's this kind of boxing game that's going on with OPEC and non-OPEC trying to remove supplies to prop up the oil price as the U.S., as you suggested, continues to expand its production. We don't know for how much longer at this sort of pace, maybe 4 or 5 years. So is this why we can't really break out of $60 a barrel? And it's a difficult game for OPEC and non-OPEC to try to manage by taking off supplies to counter and even encourage shale production at a higher price?
John, you may remember 2018, January, Davos, you made a session. I was there, and some oil producer ministers were also there. And I said, we think US oil production will grow about 1.5 million barrels per day. And some of the colleagues from the oil producing countries said, it is IEA is exaggerating this. This is a wrong number, because it cannot be so high. Yes, we were wrong, because it didn't increase 1.5, it increased 1.8. It was even higher than what we said. Now, if the countries here, this is a very difficult game, if the countries here change their production policies and push the prices up, the growth from US will be even higher and will put even stronger downward pressure on the prices. So therefore, to find the right price levels will be important for both the OPEC and non-OPEC producers. Our numbers show that in the next 5 years, 70% of the global oil production will come from United States only, 70%. And up to now, when we revise our US production numbers, we always revise upwards.
Okay. Patrick Pouyanne, with that sort of context today, you've, like your colleague next to you on the left there, Mr. Descalzi, put a lot of chips on the Middle East. You've given a lot of emphasis here because of the lower cost of production and the right structure of the contracts. What gets your attention today in terms of investment? I had an investment chart there looking at the power sector and oil and gas. But if we look at hydrocarbons today in your portfolio, what would you say is the main focus of the Total portfolio in the Middle East and beyond? Where are you spending your time?
Let me be clear. It's I think I like the title of this conference, Energy for Prosperity. It's a good word, prosperity. And we are today not speaking with only, even if we are in Abu Dhabi, to producing countries, but the attendance in the room is also a lot of consuming countries. It's
140 countries represented.
More consumers than producers. And I think it's important because when we think to the evolution of the energy markets, we must always remind that there are some fundamentals. The prosperity, energy is at the core of any social economic development, and we need to provide a reliable, an affordable, and a sustainable energy. Of course, the climate change put a huge emphasis on the last word, sustainability, because it's a future of our planet. But we must all at the same time being able to deliver this energy. For a company like Total, I take, by the way, my Bible, are the studies of Fatih Birol. On my desk, I have all the IEA yearly assumptions. And what struck me is that in 2040, 2050, we will still have in the portfolio, in the energy mix of the world, all energies. We are always trying to present this discussion as black and white. Let's get rid of fossil fuels, the whole bunch of them, and we'll have a perfect world. It's not like that. In 2040, 50, still oil and gas will be part of the energy mix. Of course, the first primary target should be to eliminate coal. That's the primary target. There is something today which is not serious in the world. Last year, in 2018, you should have put in the same chart, the investments in coal have still increased compared to 17, 16. This is frankly something, we are not serious, globally speaking. We are not serious. We all know that getting out of coal is should be the primary objective. The second one, by the way, should be to stop having deforestation on this planet, because a natural-based solution in terms of carbon sink are the most effective one. So, having said that, it's not to be defensive of oil and gas or oil and gas companies. Of course we are, but we have to provide this energy. If we are strong in the Middle East, it's because here it is a region where we can continue to produce lowest cost of oil cost. And I think, by the way, that I'm not very optimistic in 2014 about the oil price, because I know that the oil demand certainly somewhere will peak and even maybe stable. So that means that the oil price somewhere should peak as well. But being in the Middle East and continuing to produce oil, the last drop of oil will come from this region. So that's fundamental.
Even if you sustain demand at 100 million barrels a day, this is the low-cost base.
Yeah, exactly.
You touched on the price very quickly, and I don't want to spend our time looking at price swings, but it's very difficult to break out, if I'm thinking of North Sea Brent, above $60 a barrel today, because of the dynamics that all of us are talking about here. There's investments into renewables. We're starting to see a slight slowdown at the same time. And we're 10 years into the economic cycle with US and China trade disputes as well. Are you kind of fixing your budgets at $50, $55 a barrel for North Sea Brent?
Let's be clear. In a company, our mission is not to guess the price. It's to look permanently to the break-even of my portfolio, which is today, before dividend, under $25 per barrel. And we use an assumption, globally speaking, to approve investments around $50. So, I mean, we are there. What we offer to our investors is a capacity to deliver a sustainable revenue and profit, whatever the price is. The best way is not to guess and to begin to what is the price will be. So $50, I think, is a prudent but a good assumption. It does not mean that the price will be 50. But again, if the price is higher, which I I can hope I will have more money to reinvest. And to reinvest where? And we reinvest in two segments heavily, in natural gas.
Yes.
Because natural gas, frankly, there is abundant resource. It's a flexible energy. And it is a right combination with renewables to cope with the intermittency in renewables. So I advocate that when people are putting all the fossil fuels in the same basket, we make a big mistake. And natural gas, all know that when we produce power, electricity, with a gas-fired power plant, the emissions are twice less than with coal. Of course, we have to tackle the methane emissions, which are linked to natural gas. We are very serious about it. We have put some stringent target in our company to manage stringent methane emissions. Today on upstream chain, we are under 0.2%. So we have to be very good and we have to put all this industry to be serious about it. But natural gas, we invest heavily in LNG and natural gas. And the other part where we invest is electricity. Because when I look to the dynamic of the market, as Fatih said already, the demand for electricity will almost double in the next 25 years. And electricity could come either from natural gas or from renewables. And so this is a strategy. So my investments, and this region, we would love to make more renewables in this region, but honestly, the price of is gone so low that it's difficult to be very profitable.
I know, we'll get to that shortly in the discussion here. Fatih, you had your hand up. I'm going to finish the roundtable and come back, and then we'll open it up. Claudio, I think it's a good place to start for Eni is that since we last did an interview for CNN, you've had an abundance of different contracts and works here in the Arabian Gulf, in the peninsula, and also stretching into the northern Mediterranean in Egypt. So you focused on this region, and you have, what, 16 blocks and 16 different projects over 16 months. Give us a sense of why you've put a lot of Eni's chips on the Middle East.
So we put a lot of energy because in the recent past, we found so many resources in Africa. So we found a lot of resources. So we had really too many eggs in the same basket. So really the first priority was to make a strong diversifications. We are in 70 countries, but clearly the big bunch of reserves were there. So we started expanding our activities Middle East, in Mexico, for example. But clearly Middle East, why? I think that the answer already has been given by my colleagues, because the first area in terms of reserves is mature. They select us for technology, fast time to market, so you can work fast and you have a very strong counterpart, so you can do things quickly with the best technology, with the best HSE. So I think there is an area where it's absolutely, is an OECD country, we can say. So it's a country that allows you to go fast and give value to your investment. Clearly, the package that we offered is not just exploration or development. You have to give something more. You have to give technology. You have to talk about renewable. You have to talk about circular economy. So you have to talk about the future.
You're talking about here in the UAE specifically.
Specifically, sorry, because this microphone.
That's better, yeah.
Ripping that. In Abu Dhabi, clearly, because most of our blocks acquisition has been done in Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Oman, but in the Emirate mostly, and exploration, production, development, especially the big gas development is in Abu Dhabi. So we can really offer a platform that is the platform for the future. It's not just pure gas development. We have to talk about CCUS or CCS. We have to capture the CO2 because we are.
Let me interrupt you there, because this is a very good point, because I had an interview with Lord Brown, the former CEO of BP today, and he was talking about the importance of being much more aggressive on carbon capture. And then there's another discussion to have here about a carbon tax and whether to move more aggressively in that direction. but is it a stretch for any to introduce these new technologies? As you suggested, ADNOC and your partners here in the Middle East are asking you to bring a technology transfer to circular economy to deliver on carbon capture. How much have you had to relearn or learn for the first time at Eni to deliver on these demands?
I think that we started some times ago, clearly, for renewables to everybody. We use renewables to reduce our gas consumptions in our operations. Clearly, we develop a lot of proprietary technology for biofuel, for biodiesel, but also to treat waste to fuel. So waste to fuel, organic and inorganic, so plastic. So there is a package of new technology that you can offer because the future will be different. It's true that, as Fatih say, in 2040, 50, we still have 48, 50% of oil and gas. That is true, but the world will be split in a different area. You have OECD countries that are absolutely flat in terms of demand, that they need something else. You have non-OECD or developing countries that have a different kind of, so you have as an energy company to give a different kind of package. But just one point on what Fatih and Patrick said before about electricity and coal. We are increasing electricity, it's true, and we are going to continue to increase electricity. We need to reduce emission, it's true. Emissions are growing up. Not the last year, they grow practically 2% CO2 emission. But we have to consider that coal, even now, is the major source for power plant. 38% is due to coal, and they produce 72% of the CO2 emissions. So coal is still, in a world that is in a transition, it's 3 years that we make panel, and we talk why we are struggling to change and go ahead. But coal is still a leader in the power plant, 38%, and that produces about 14 gigatons of CO2. Gigaton of CO2. The energy system is producing 33 gigatons this year, 33 point something. If you delete all this coal, and nobody talk about that, you can reduce of 13. Then you can use what? Gas. We have a lot of gas now. A lot of gas. For that reason, the price of gas is so low. Then we can push on the electricity. But if we push on electricity, instead of using renewable that in the energy system represent 2-3%, we talk about what? So I think that there is no a global view. There is really
it's a very good point.
A small view, and we continue to talk about stuff, but nothing happened because we are not attacking the right subject.
Okay, good. I'm going to bring in our folks from the IEA afterwards, but I think it's a good time for the World Energy Council to speak up. And I want to bring up a slide here to make the point, because you put out your new scenarios, Christoph, which I think is very interesting. If you can bring that slide up, please, looking at the renewables in power generation by 2040. You laid out the different scenarios. If we can get that slide up, please. And you call it the modern jazz scenario, unfinished symphony scenario, the hard rock scenario that play these out here. Do you want to explain each one of these and the penetration differences in a simple way for the audience to understand it, Christoph? Why do we have these variables looking at the modern jazz, unfinished symphony, and the hard rock? To Claudio's point as well, because the coal still, if you go to an India, is representing at sometimes at peak 70% of primary energy supplies when it comes to power generation. Please.
Well, thank you very much, John. I think before diving into that very question, it's probably interesting to compare where we have come since the last Congress in Istanbul. And if you look at, we work with 3,000 organizations, companies, ministries, etc., in almost 100 countries. And the signals we have gotten have changed over the past 3 years. What have been the biggest changes? I think a first big change is really around the fact, I think, the certainty that this transition is fast, deep and that there is an uncertain outcome. I think this is a first statement that you would hear in a much more, in a stronger way. You see this in boardroom discussions with many of the organizations that we are working with. A second signal is we have focused, the whole climate ambition obviously accelerates. But so far, the discussion has mostly been on electricity, on the fact, yes, we are electrifying, has been said, almost doubling over the next 20, 25 years. But even if we double electricity with those numbers, the reality is that we get to perhaps 30% electricity in terms of final demand, which leaves us with 70% of molecules, which leaves us with a challenge that is largely unsolved on the climate science. And I think as long as we are not honest about that fact base, then I think the climate is unsolved. And that's a story that is told by our scenario. We have, over the past 3 years, and that's a second big change, we have seen much more discussion around that very issue. The fact, yes, electrification and greening of the electrons is something that is moving ahead, but we need to start the discussion on the question on greening of molecules. And we have seen out of Japan, the G20, the question, we have seen many other countries picking up on that, be that even Saudi, talking to Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Morocco, Germany talking about those issues. The question, how is there, yes, not a short-term, a mid to long-term future where we can start greening molecules, use existing infrastructure, so not throw infrastructure out of the window, that would be too expensive, but use existing infrastructure and bring increasingly green molecules on the liquids side. I think that's a really big change since Istanbul. We wouldn't have formulated that there.
Okay. Do you want to cover the scenarios and why do they vary so much? I'm
so
going to take a stand up here so I can communicate on the far side as well.
So on the scenario side, we have those three fundamental views or directions. One is a world where we have the modern jazz world, where we have the rhythm.
Excuse me for a second. I just want to make sure we bring that graphic back up for Christoph addressing it. Go ahead on the screen, please, for the audience.
So the modern jazz world, jazz is dominated by rhythm. Rhythm are well-functioning markets that drive innovation, bring the cheapest products to consumers now. They're really, really the digital, all the platform and all that is becoming reality in a jazz world. In a symphony, so this is not a directed economy, it's a market-driven economy. And you can see that we see an increase in renewables from where we are today, but it's not the highest. If we want to get to the maximum result on renewable, we need more direction. We need a CO2 price that is strong. And symphonic orchestration of that, the director giving the signal obviously helps to get us there. So symphony is the one that delivers the best result on the renewable side. Now the hard rock is a fragmented, and we are saying fragmented leadership is one of the biggest challenges for many things in energy. And one of the things that we often underestimate, it's not only the carbon price, it's also oil market for good technology, best technology, cheapest technology. And think, how did the solar revolution really happen? It was Germany paying China to deliver cheap solar to countries, including in the Middle East, and that was only possible with low trade barriers. The higher we have, the more we have fragmentation, the more we have problems, the less we have best technology, the less best technology travels to those places where it's needed, and that explains why in hard rock, this last world, we have the least penetration of renewables.
Okay. Jean, do you want to take it from the NG standpoint? Because you talked about the necessity for energy efficiency, and this is where the company is not a gas producer, but is very large in midstream. How does this apply when we look at the scenarios that Christoph has laid out for us here in terms of gaining more efficiency from the system, which is often overlooked?
You want to ask me about my musical taste, but I will wait a bit before answering that. No, maybe a couple of points, if I may. First one, we've seen in the past couple of years a number of weather events which have created in a lot of countries a stronger focus on climate change. And we see pressure coming from the general public, pressure coming from the citizens, the guys who are putting their ballot in the ballot box, saying we need to move and move quickly. And we've seen a number of large corporations, governments, starting to set net zero carbon emission objective for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Second element, affordability of the energy transition is becoming an issue. I remind you that in France, we've seen a few months ago a significant social crisis which started on an increase on carbon tax. And when we discuss with local government, when we discuss with corporation, we see this focus on affordability, competitiveness becoming very, very important. And then at ENGIE, we draw the conclusion that energy efficiency is really the area where we can support our customer. This is very important. We have about 20 billion euros of revenue today on services where we support customers, corporation, local government, bringing them ways to use less energy and to use it better. And we consider that this is absolutely key, and this is in our strategy where we want to put resources. And to be very simplistic and to take an example here in Abu Dhabi, we've been a long-time investor in this country. The last significant decision we have taken was to invest with Mubadala on Tabrid, who is a leader in district cooling. You realize that in a country like Abu Dhabi, at the time where we have peak demand of electricity, cooling, air conditioning represent a very significant part of the energy which is produced. So bringing a solution like district cooling, which allow cheaper access to cool air, but also much better carbon footprint, this is a real advantage. And we think that what we are doing in this region can certainly be used in other parts of the world. Good. So for us, clearly, energy efficiency is something that's absolutely necessary to make sure that the energy transition can be made affordable, and this is the direction of travel that we have chosen at ENGIE.
Good. Claudio brought up this idea of gas as a transition fuel to reduce the footprint of coal that we see today. How does this fit into the ENGIE strategy still as a midstream producer?
We completely share that. I mean, we are a large midstreamer, as you know, and we consider that indeed gas is a source of energy which has a role to play in the transition. Its role will probably diminish some decades from now, but short term it is absolutely necessary, and the ability to bring competitive gas to our customers is also something which is important. And if I may, a word on renewable, we have also a strong commitment at ENGIE in developing renewable. We have an objective of 9 gigawatts in the next few years that we are willing to put on the ground. The focus for us, once again, is customer. We believe that more and more renewable electricity will be sold through PPA, through agreements between producer and customers. This is already the case in the US, and we want to develop renewable capacity to be able to bring to our customer the source of energy that they want as part of their energy transition scenario. So for ENGIE, really focus on customers, and when I say customers, again, corporation, local government is something which is absolutely key in our strategy.
Good. The local governments have embraced the idea, though, is what you're suggesting. Jean?
Sorry?
The local governments have embraced this idea to bring in a company like ENGIE.
Well, we see that. I mean, we can talk to large cities like Paris. We can talk to people managing universities, airports, large hospitals. And yes, we see this theme of energy efficiency becoming a very important element to put in place these scenarios, because the less energy you consume, the best carbon footprint you have, but you have also better economics. And this is this alignment between carbon footprint and overall efficiency, which in our view makes a winning case.
Great. Francesco La Camera, thanks for your patience. He's the new Director General of IRENA here, taking the job at the start of 2019. So we should say, right, Chairman? A welcome to Abu Dhabi to him, because he's a newbie. I want to bring up the graphic on the price of renewables in 2018. And this was from IRENA. And you made a very good point, because you're getting your feet under the table here. We're seeing new contracts even lower than this. So we can bring up the next one on the price of renewables. But it's extraordinary what we've seen in the last 5 years and this price comparison. to what's taking place. Solar at 8.5 cents, and this is a balance globally, right? So this is not the lowest price. Offshore wind, onshore wind, geothermal. But the first thing when I showed you on the sidelines before we came on the stage, you said, John, these are very dated already. We have new contracts coming in much lower than that, right? It's changing rapidly. Where do you want to pick up on the cost competitiveness of renewables here? And then I want to talk to this various group about battery storage. Where's the breakthrough going to come in that makes this much more competitive going forward? Please.
Thank you. First of all, I wish to thank the organizer for having me here. I was very happy to hear this morning the UAE government representative say that they are proud to host IRENA here in Abu Dhabi. I want to say that IRENA is proud to be hosted by a country that has so ambitious goal in terms of reducing their CO2 footprint. Before to enter to the competitive part of renewable, I wish to make a point. I enjoy this discussion where you are talking about the possible mix for the future. In 1 week, we will be in New York for the climate summit. We are in the era of the Paris Agreement. Science say that we have to reduce dramatically our footprint very shortly if we don't want to pay catastrophic consequences. So the question that we have to pose ourselves before all is what energy mix is possible to fulfill the Paris Agreement goals. And this brings me to my point concerning also the cost of the energy. In our estimate, the electrification of the power system, as has been said by Fatih, and the electrification of the power system fed by renewable is in the condition to get the 90% of CO2 emission by 2050. And this will be having the global energy production and consumption be in line with the Paris Agreement goals. And we are going in that direction. The transition is absolutely in front of us and is mainly guided by the market. Because you know, we have this data bank on all the action around the planet. We know that already those costs are higher than the actual cost. Just some week ago in Portugal, an action for solar photovoltaic bring to 1.7 cents per kilowatts. So the cost only in the last year, the cost of renewable has decreased 11%. We estimate that for the 3/4 of onshore wind and 4/5 of the solar PV project capacity that is commissioned for 2020, it will be much cheaper than any other way to produce energy. So the transition is there. The problem is that we have to accelerate this path. We think that is absolutely possible. We have, we have to look at the future. I like very much an expression that has been by Descalzi. Tomorrow will be very different from the past. And it's also the way we have to look to the future. The past cannot be so helpful because everything is going to change. We are convinced that natural gas can play a role in the transition periods. I think there is a way, a path possible to the hydrogen and then to green hydrogen that will play a very important role in the second half of this century. So we are moving. And what is important and we have to understand that for the time being, renewable are the font of energy that is cheaper. We estimate that the next 4 or 5 years, to maintain in life a traditional fossil fuel plant will be more costly than build a new renewable energy plant. And this, I think, that has to be considered. It's important from an economical point of view. We estimate the global GDP will grow 2.5 to 2050 just because moving to renewable is socially acceptable because we produce jobs. I made the example just in my previous meeting in the Euro-Mediterranean field, how they do plants in Egypt, in Morocco, altogether are engaging more than 20,000 workers. And for the maintenance, more than 9,000. So the world is changing more rapidly than we can think.
Great. Thank you very, very much for that. So I'm going to open this up to a lot more debate and have everybody chime in when they want. I wanted to get a first round of questions in. What unlocks what Francesco was talking about, Fatih, in your view, and things moving faster than we expected? Are we going to see a breakthrough in storage, for example, for renewables, because it's always this peak demand, what it can supply during the day and then how it fades at night? Where is, when we talk about energy for our prosperity, where's the breakthrough on storage? And I'd love to have the chairman weigh in as well on Abu Dhabi. What are you planning on in that front here from the IEA, from what you can see so far?
So first of all, may I mention one thing, that I think all the colleagues here mention climate change. It is an extremely important topic. We all have to think about this. But before that, I want to make something sure, since we are all energy people, energy is a good thing. Let's don't put energy in the basket of the bad things. Energy is a good thing. The problem is with emissions. So energy and emissions are two different things. Energy makes our life much more prosperous, much easier, more comfortable, and so on. This is number one. Number two, now we should look at more carefully where the problem is. Today, about 1/3 of all the emissions from energy sector comes from one source: coal in power generation alone. And here problem is the following, John. We have today more than 2,000 gigawatts of coal plants in the world.
2,000 gigabytes?
2,000 gigawatts, and bulk of them in Asia. And they are very young fleet. They are 11 years old, the average. In Germany, you have it, 45 years old. In the United States, 43 years old. They are already close to their retirement. But in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, they are very young. And before the money goes back to the investors, they will not shut it down because we talk in Abu Dhabi in these comfortable armchairs. We don't want emissions. It will not happen. So therefore, the issue is not only to look at the future, what we will build in the future, sustainable investments and so on, so renewables, efficiency and so on, but at the same time, what are we going to do with the legacy issue, with a huge, because these power plants will emit emissions 30, 40 years more. And no chance whatsoever to reach our climate targets. This is number one. Number two, I think in the climate change debate, there is a bit of a, if I may say so, egoism. Everybody has his or her own technology. This one lacks renewables, the other one lacks CCUS, the other one efficiency. If the emissions are reduced as a result of gas replacing coal, it doesn't count. Why not? I give you one number. In the last 5 years, coal to gas switch resulted in 500 million tons of emission reduction. You know what does it mean, 500 million tons? It means equivalent of having 500 million electric cars. Equivalent of having 500 million electric cars, and we have today in the world 5 million electric cars, so 100 times more. So why not from coal to gas in the United States, in China, in Europe? We need coal to gas switch, we need renewables, the mainstay, efficiency, in my view, nuclear power, especially shutting down the existing nuclear power, which is the cheapest source of zero carbon electricity generation, in my view, doesn't go with the fighting seriously against climate change. So we need all clean energy technologies, plus the new ones, as you mentioned, one of them being the storage. Why we need that? For two reasons. One, Solar and wind, as we see here, becoming cheaper and cheaper, but they have a problem. In India, the peak demand is when the family comes home in the evening, turn on the air conditioner, turn on the television where there is no sun. How do you balance this out? Therefore, storage, and we hope that the storage prices costs will go down, which are going down. And IEA is making major efforts, and the IEA member countries, as this will be an excellent bridge for the renewables to be being a bigger part of the solution. Today, we discussed the climate change issue mainly from a perspective of power sector. But there are others. The emissions from industrial sector, household, the transportation sector, cars, trucks, and jets, we need all of them. Therefore, my humble suggestion is we need a holistic approach, looking at all the sectors, getting all the clean energy technologies on board. We cannot afford to exclude this one because I don't like this. We can't exclude that one. We need all of them, in my view, renewables, efficiency, carbon capture, nuclear power, and all of them. Then and then, we may only have a chance to reach our climate targets. Otherwise, no.
Great turn in the conversation, because here in Abu Dhabi you have nuclear power being developed, solar projects that are well underway. Chairman Al Marar?
First of all, let's just go back to the fundamental. We cannot go without energy. It's in our blood. It's in our mechanical system. So we, as on the chair of the government, we have all seen, we have exposed to all these possible scenarios. So if we're talking about the holistic view, we've been looking at it from literature point of view, research, closed labs, proven technology, whether it be in batteries. For example, I have to give a credit to our electrical, water and electrical sector. They're actually having 108 megawatt installed batteries, which actually they call as a virtual power plant that can be dispatched in no time. So if we look at the holistic view and just zoom out of all of this and say, well, have we harvested all of these technologies, innovations, what-if analysis, and actually model that as a government point of view and say, does it make sense from environment point of view, economic returns, security of supply, and how much actually it contributes toward the local government and the federal, in our case, as a UAE? What is the best policy that actually the government need to be adopting? Now, in order to save all the time, we've actually could model that on a time machine and say, let's just run scenarios. What if the gas price just changes? What are the limits? What if the solar actually goes tremendously down as well? How much we can take out of it on even our network? So what we came up with on a holistic view is an integrated energy model that has been launched, and I encourage the audience, you gentlemen as well, to stop by and look at it and say, what if scenarios? How that can change the demand with the people behaviors, electrification, moving toward different application of electricity, toward supply part, and how would actually the supply be changed in order to have an optimum energy mix. And this is what actually we care about. An affordable, safe, and a security supply of power. And this is if we're looking at it from the holistic point of view. And I have to say, we have the system now running that have enabled us to actually work out our future with regard to how much we could actually balance between supply and demand.
How long did it take you to get that model right, out of curiosity?
Actually, it took us about 7 months with a full of dedication. Testing models, we stress tested it, not only with the Department of Energy, but actually with some other government departments, such as the impact on social, the impact on job creation, and the impact on the economic as well. We've also have stressed that with some international organization to actually push the limit and say, does it actually satisfy us? And I have to also admit that this model, it actually becomes useless unless you actually keep on updating it with regard to technology and innovations and so forth.
Great. I want to pose this question to the panel. I'm going to leave it open for everybody to jump in. But what Fatih was saying is that we shouldn't exclude certain energies, for example, when it comes to nuclear energy, and some have made the political decision in which to do so. And I brought this question forward to Lord Brown this morning in the discussion that we had. It seems as a race we're moving too slow in the transition. I started launching a show, The Global Energy Challenge, and the more I read, the more panicked I get. There wasn't one document I've read or one person I've spoken to that thinks we're going to hit the climate change target. They said it's impossible, and in fact, it's going to be probably double what our target is. I mean, you're an oil and gas producer, Patrick. Are we doing what we can be doing from your vantage point to manage the transition? I'd love everybody to jump in to the same question. You're all smart people. I follow hydrocarbons. I've been following it for 25 years. But we also see the challenge that's on the table. Are we doing what we can, in your view?
I think honestly, it's a very complex matter. Because,
of course it is. Yeah.
No, but because fundamentally, you have in this world some developed economies where, by the way, we see more and more pressures, where there is a great consciousness about climate change of the population, we can afford it. And then you have emerging countries which clearly for them the priority is to get out of poverty, to create more jobs, and energy is just fundamental. And the cost of energy, the price of energy, the affordability is fundamental. And today, unfortunately, the cheapest one is coal. That's the reality of the world. And so, of course, and then we have the climate agreement, Paris Agreement, which gives some targets, which does not give the path, even if it's national contribution. And I should remind to everybody that the sum of all the national contribution was not giving 2 degrees. It was giving 3 degrees. Why? Because, in fact, there is a path for this transition, which is not immediately to go on the 2-degree scenario. It's not possible. You know, we have to find a way. It's not a linear decrease, contrary to what we think. It will be a step-by-step, and new technologies will come in the future to help everybody. So it's true that today people say there is an urgency. If we had to do some urgent action, one obvious one would be, let's find a way to stop building new coal-fired power plants. Do you think it's normal that we continue to build new ones, but you see plenty of money coming to build these ones? There is something which is strange there. The same, we should try to stop deforesting on the planet. The deforestation is an issue. So why is it complex? It's complex because, again, you have some countries who want to have access to cheap energy. So, of course, part of the Paris Agreement was also a matter of transferring some money, some wealth from the developed countries to the emerging ones. This part does not work today. So it will not be, my message will not be, there is no immediate solution. We have to find a way to be on the right road, but it will not be immediate. And we have to understand the point of views of all of emerging countries. And the Paris Agreement was fundamentally not only a climate agreement, it was a climate and development agreement. It was a matter of development, of do we develop the planet?
Well, this raises an interesting point because Patrick was talking about we have to get this wealth transfer to the emerging economies of the world. We still have about 1 billion people not living with access to daily power, which is quite extraordinary in the 21st century. It's below 1 billion, which is good, but it's still about 1 billion. So, Christophe, I mean, should the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, should we be thinking really differently about the deceleration of coal investment, for example, and our lending should be putting climate change at the top of the agenda, not 1, 2, 3, and 4, but it should be at the top of the agenda. If Patrick says, as we all know, energy is important, right? But should we think about lending in a very different way?
Well, I think we have to be very careful which problem we want to solve. And let me first give one point on the energy access issue and then go back to perhaps the 2,000 gigawatt of coal, which is an entirely different issue. And the first point I'm going to make on the access side is that with our scenarios, surprisingly, you know, what you're suggesting is a top-down measure. And what we surprisingly find with our scenarios and our work, and actually a lot of real observation confirm that, is that top-down work hasn't really solved the access issue. 86% of those who are not electrified are far out in the rural, and there's no coal plant who will deliver to those rural people.
But the off-grid innovations have been pretty impressive.
Exactly. I think what delivers to those today are totally innovative and, frankly, flex-regulated, in a very open-minded to new models, kind of entrepreneurial approaches, and we see tons of them being rolled out. That has brought down over the past 10 years energy access, the lack therefore of 1.6 billion to below 1 billion. So there's progress on that side. Now, a second point I'd like to make is really going back to those 2,000 gigawatts of coal and the fact that they are going to, many of them have a lifetime of another 40 years. And that simply is not, it's not acceptable. It's simply not acceptable. And I think that just throwing them out of the window is also a tough thing. That's, as we point out, that's a lot of stranded investment that can we afford that? Who can afford that? Now, I think we need to think about this in a slightly different way. And the coal example, what Japan is doing, piloting, is very important for a number of reasons. So they take one coal plant for now. Yes, it's only one, and it's very small, but they retrofit this to ammonia. And ammonia they're going to source that ammonia from, they are building contracts with Saudi, with Australia, they're in discussion with others, but those two are quite advanced. Now, what is the specialty here? Ammonia is nothing else than NH3, so it's basically hydrogen with a bit of N in there. You have to deal with the N. But this is hydrogen, and yes, in the first place, we have to deliver some of it fossil, probably with CCS, but over time, there's already discussion of delivering some of that in a greener way. And what is the beauty about ammonia? Ammonia is today the biggest traded chemical. You don't invent any new supply chain. What you invent, actually, what you do is marginally produce greener and greener ammonia, and you deliver it into an existing supply chain, infrastructure, and even most of the coal plant is going to stay there. So what I'm inviting to think about here is, and we have very clearly formulated that. We need to think, when we think about the transition, not about throwing out old infrastructure. We need to think about how can we repurpose, how can we green gradually by not inventing new supply chain and new infrastructure. And I think that's a very important message if you want to have an affordable energy transition.
Good. It sounds, that's a very good point. Jean-Pierre, this sounds like it fits into the NG strategy. So are you taking different projects that are there and retooling them for your customers to make them much more efficient? So the innovations, and then let's address it with the panel. I mean, the innovations bubble from the top if there's an opportunity there. What do you see as innovations in this space?
No, I mean, we see innovation coming, and indeed innovation will allow us to speed up the speed at which we can achieve this transformation. And you mentioned ammonia, you can mention hydrogen, who has also certainly a role to play. Going back to the question you asked to Patrick, I mean, are we going too slowly? Yes, I think we should leave this conference feeling that there is a need to go faster. Now I agree with Patrick. I mean, there's a couple of obvious no-regret decisions which have to be made, and we have difficulties. We don't have the right governance at the global level to do that, about coal, deforestation. Then the complexity, as I see it, is that the energy sector needs more and more to work with downstream sectors. Chemical is an example, steel, cement. There is a need for more cooperation between large users of energy and the energy sector. And I spent most of my career in chemicals, and I'm very pleased today to be associated with this energy sector. But I have a feeling that the ability to create partnership along supply chain between the energy providers and the consumers is something very important. And frankly speaking, looking at our experience at ENGIE, each time we can develop a high-level discussion with large users of energy on how we can improve their overall footprint, we see impressive results coming. So really this ability to reach out for the energy sector and have the discussions with governments, with the industries which are using large amount of energy, we make progress. And this is the difficulty is that it takes time, it takes resources to do that, but let's make sure that energy sector starts this and reaches out to make sure that we can indeed increase the speed at which we are tackling this, this challenge.
Okay. I'm going to ask one more question to Director General La Camera. What is your mandate, do you think, in your new role as Director General of IRENA now to accelerate this discussion? Because I hear a willingness right across the board. There's nobody that says I don't want to try to provide a solution, whether it's in Abu Dhabi or in Patrick or Claudio's fields. But how do you bring the hydrocarbon sector into the conversation within the renewable energy sector to see where there's collaboration, since we're talking about energy for prosperity here? How do you see the mandate of moving IRENA along here in Abu Dhabi?
That's a good question. In responding to your question, first I wish to come back to one point. Then the energy demand that we have to face is be confronted with what all is our actual capacity and our mix. And then we have to think about the future. We have Southeast Asia, where the energy demand is growing 40% per year. The double pace, I think, that in China. Africa, the energy demand is growing fast. So we have one problem with the mix of capacity that we have now, and we have a problem with the mix of capacity that we have to build to front this demand. And my question is, again, the IPPC window of 11 years. Which are the plans that may provide energy in the short term we need to have a world where the energy is a fragment for a more justice world? And my response is only one, that is renewable. And we think that in our mandate there is space for talk and discuss with most of the people that you see, I think all, that we think that there is chance for discussing also the more, how to say, the more extreme technology as the CCUS in certain parts of the world. But we are ready to discuss with the gas people when we are looking to the future of hydrogen and the green hydrogen. We are ready to discuss with this. There is no doubt that we are ready to. And we have to follow what Descalzi said. The future will be different. We cannot think about the future as has been the past, that we have this dominant oil demand, coal demand. All countries will have a different system. Just an example, I had a short bilateral with the Deputy Minister of Energy of Portugal. They have more 60–70% of renewables into the system. Variable energy, no problem. They have an interconnection with Spain. Spain has an interconnection with France. Imagine a world where storage interconnection may play the difference. And we are ready to work with the world of the fossil fuel world, when they are ready to go for a cleanest world.
Okay, very good. I wanted to talk to this panel. We had some side conversations before coming onto the stage to say, and I think it plays back to Christoph's or the WEC's hard rock scenario. We're in a really unusual political situation today. Two leading economies in the world are fighting with each other. We see the threat of Brexit that could potentially unravel or have wider implications on the European Union. India rightly says, I need to reduce energy poverty, so I'm investing in coal-powered plants. How does this hard rock scenario, in your view, Fatih, delay the necessary innovation in the energy transition? I'd love to hear Patrick, I'd love to hear Claudio on this point. It's just a period of time that'll pass, but it seems to hit us at the worst time, right? Because we have objectives to meet. We have goals to lay out to, as Patrick was saying, that are not easy goals. How do you see it in that respect? The political discord that we have today, which is pretty nasty, climate deniers that are still out there, and having the #1 and #2 economies fighting with each other over trade. Please.
So I think, John, we have to first of all, come all together. This is very important. From the dynamism of the youth to the energy companies who want to reduce the methane emissions, we have to have a grand coalition. Otherwise, we cannot succeed it. It cannot be left only one group. Every ton of CO2 reduced must count. It is not only the CO2 counts which is reduced by efficiency or by nuclear. All of them counts. We need all of them. If we can have a holistic approach, it will be very important. Renewables. The mainstay of the fight against climate change. But I tell you something. We are, every year, in the last few years, we are seeing renewable generation breaking records. But at the same time, global CO2 emission increase also in a very, very high manner. It is not a solution. Today, the share of fossil fuels in the total energy mix is 80%. It was exactly 30% 30 years ago. Nothing changed. Renewables get cheaper, efficiency policies, climate policies, and as my colleague from ENGIE says, in some countries, I wouldn't say everywhere, but some European countries, people vote for the climate change, but still 80%, no change. We have to be realistic. Therefore, we have to, of course, push the renewables, but we have to look at also other solutions. We cannot exclude the other main technologies which can bring us to our climate goals, such as carbon capture and storage. If the fossil fuels will be with us for 3-4 decades, which seems the case, we need carbon capture and storage, and plus, iron steel sector, petrochemical sector, cement sector, they all need to reduce emissions, so that carbon capture should be a part of the problem. In my view, nuclear power, both in the advanced and the developing countries, if run safely and properly, it can be a source of reducing the emissions. Energy efficiency, fuel number one, extremely important. Do you know, John, what is the biggest driver of electricity consumption growth in Asia? Industrial sector? No. Electric cars? Not at all. Lights? No. Number one driver of electricity consumption growth in Asia is AC. Air conditioners.
I thought you were going to say that. Yeah.
This is the blind spot of energy, but also...
And as they get wealthier, they want air conditioning.
Exactly. So this is normal, because in Asia, 2 out of 10 households has air conditioners. In Japan, USA, 9 out of 10. And the problem is, in Asia, in order to provide the same comfort, air conditioners use 3 times more electricity than in Japan, developing Asia. If you improve the energy efficiency, then you need to build less power plants. So energy efficiency is very important. So for me, the solution goes through looking at all the technologies. It will be a dogmatic and the egoistic approach if we stick to our own favorite pet technology and say, no, other technologies I don't want. This, for me, this is the magic formula.
Okay. Claudio, we had a discussion before we came on the stage. You get worried, rightfully, and I think Patrick would probably share the same. We're not benefiting from the US-China trade dispute. It's starting to hit demand even for primary energy and oil and gas. But do you worry that this forgoes or delays the investments and things that we need in the prosperity equation for energy and even when dealing with the transition? And I'd love to have Christophe weigh in and Patrick as well.
Clear that is impacting the demand, so it's clear it's creating more volatility. Can you hear me or?
That's better.
Yes, please. I have to put in my mouth. So it's creating more volatility and is impacting the demand that is not positive for investment in any kind of energy because the demand is going down. But going back to what we were discussing, that is also linked to volatility. I'm not very positive. I'm not very positive about the future because it's not just, we talk about carbon, so the carbon footprint to reduce CO2 emission is not from 2015. It's from the 90s, 2000, and I'm the only one that is not working.
It's okay.
So
I don't think it's the hair that holds
no,
it up, but it seems to be the challenge.
Ear, big head, I don't know what something. My head is.
Okay,
I have to change my head. So
mine stays steady, but it's fine. We can hear you.
So I removed this. It's also uncomfortable.
I think you're ready to throw it out.
So I think that I'm not positive, because if in these years the CO2 emission increased, we talk a lot. We talk a lot. We are a really good talker about what to do, but clearly it's a global issue, and we decide to treat it as a local issue. So you can talk all the time you want, what the NDC, as Patrick said, everybody can do what he wants. So, and became ideological. So there is the green ideological party that fight against the coal, and the coal fight against hydrocarbons. So we cannot solve a problem fighting. We cannot solve a problem that is global locally. We cannot have different policy. Europe is putting a lot of effort, a lot of pressure. All the pressure then at the end is coming on the energy on the exploration and production and refinery and chemical producers. But the problem is it's larger. It's consumers, it's policy. You have the ATS, APS, so the market, the carbon pricing, you have just in Europe. Then if you want to produce without paying anything, you go in a country, so there is a carbon leakage. You go in a country where there is no carbon pricing. So how we can think that we can solve the problem? Fighting, creating an ideological conflict, attacking who has the solution and the money to solve the problem, because in our company we reduce in 6 years, we reduce 30% of our scope 1 emission. So it means that we can achieve, but without doing anything, we are increasing. So I think that we are a very good talker, but we are not really able to do collectively, in a global way, find a solution. So we put target, but we don't create a schedule, engagement. Here we have to work top down. If we want to work bottom up, nothing happens, and we are going to increase our emissions. Also with the best technology, if there is no policy, you cannot invest.
Thank you.
So tariff is a part of the issue, create a lot of instability, clearly, and volatility, but this is the system, how we want to solve the system that is not working.
Okay, very, very good. I'm out of time. I'm just going to give Christoph the last word on this, because that's a fairly blunt statement that it has to be from the bottom up, but also from the top down. We're not speaking from the same hymn sheet, that's for sure. In a minute, Christoph, because I have to wrap.
1 minute. I think first you ask about hard rock, but I want to end on a positive note. But before on the hard rock, the reality simply is that in a context of more fragmented leadership, we do not accelerate learning curves together in the best possible way, bring cheapest technology in the most effective way to the places where it's needed, and that is among the issues, and we don't coordinate obviously on things like carbon policy, and that's a bad outlook, and our scenarios show that. But I think on the positive side, I think while that may be true and while we see more hard rocky signals, I think on the positive side we see much greater pressure for innovation on the corporate side. I think today the reality is that the perception, the understanding that value is no longer as, in the past it was all generated close to the resource, and we know in the future it's going to be generated much closer to the customer. That is a new environment. That creates pressure to understand that dynamics, and we see a much greater appetite to go into open innovation, joint learning, startup collaborations that help us identify what are the opportunities there, and if anything, I think then that is the note of optimism.
Good. I could go on for another hour, but that was an hour and 15 minutes. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We're supposed to have Isabelle Cocher. So Jean-Pierre, thanks for stepping in on the behalf of ENGIE. We wanted to get a bit more gender balance. We need more women in energy as it is. I appreciate you stepping in, though, as chairman. And a nice round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very, very much.